Hey guys, and welcome back to another Java programming tutorial. So in today's video, we're going to be going over how we can compare objects and how we can get a string representation of different objects. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute, but these are really useful, and I guarantee you guys will be using this a lot, especially if you have objects like maybe like point objects or like some kind of mathematical objects that you'd want to compare without having to, I don't know, make things too complicated for yourself. Let's just say that, all right? So what I'm going to do here, or what I've already done, I guess, is I have this student class set up, and this is just what we're going to work with right now because the other classes I had in previous videos were already like finished and they had other stuff in it. So we each have a student, and currently the only attribute the student has is a name, okay? Now in my main.java here, I've just created a few different students, and then I'm just going to be printing something out to the screen, so that's why I have that right now. So we can see student class, right? We just create a name for our student. Now I just want to show you quickly how we would go about like comparing objects intuitively, right? So say I wanted to check if Joe and Bill were the same, right? Like if I want to see if they were equal to each other. Well, we know how to do that already. So what I would do is I'd say like Joe is equal to Bill. Now intuitively, you'd probably say, well, no, their names are not the same, so they're not going to be equal to each other. And well, that would be correct, but not for the reason that you think, and I'll demonstrate that to you. So we have Joe and Bill compared to each other. So watch what happens if I make these the same name, right? So you'd think, well, these would be the same object, or they'd be the same thing, right? Because they have the same name. But watch what happens when I run. We still get false. Now, why is that exactly? Well, pretty much when we use this double equal sign on two objects, right? So like Joe and Bill, the computer doesn't know how to compare them. So by default, what it does is it compares the actual object. And you see here how we're creating a new student, so a new object. And here we're creating another new student, another new object. These are actually two different objects like in memory, okay? So in your computer's RAM, these are two different entities and they're completely unique. Although, yes, they have the same name. Since we can change names and we can do things, these need to be separate objects. So when we compare here, it's actually saying, well, we're going to look and see if these are the exact same object, and well, they are not. Now, that's useful in some cases because sometimes we want to see if it's like the exact same object, but in other cases, we want to see if these objects have like the similar values, right? So in this case, we'd probably want to compare the two names of the students to see if they were the same. And in that case, we would say, well, yes, these are the same student, or we're going to say yes, they are the same, right? When we do the like double equal sign. So what I'm going to do now is I'll delete this. I'm going to show you how we can go about doing that. So inside of our student class, I'm going to add a method, okay? I'm going to call this public boolean, not boolean, and we're going to say equals. And then here, we're going to take a student object known as other, okay? And then we'll go like that. And there we are. So what I'm going to do in here is when we want to compare our student, okay, we're going to pass another student and we're going to compare their names, right? So we're going to call this dot equals on one of our students that already exists. We're going to give it another student and then we're going to see if they're the same. So how did we say we were going to check if they're the same? Well, we were going to look at their names, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, and then we'll say this dot name, and I guess I need brackets here as well. Always forget about those. If this dot name equals, okay, and then we'll say other dot name, then what we'll do is we'll simply return true, okay? Now otherwise, so if these names are not the same, what we will do is we will return false like that, okay? And that's all we need to do for our dot equals. So now what's going to happen, right, is we'll pass on one student, we'll call this, we'll check the name, and then we'll check the other student's name, see if it's true. If it is, or if they're the same, we'll return true. Otherwise, we'll return false. So now we can try this out. So these two are the same names. So let's say is Joe dot equals, and then here I guess we will put Bill. So let's run this, and you can see we get a value of true. And then if I change Bill back to say Bill, then we can run this, and we can see we get false. So now we officially have something checking for equality between the names. Now we could create more kind of ones like this, like equals grade, like whatever, if you want to do that. But this is how we can check for equality between objects, and this method is like really easy to add in. Obviously, if you had a student with a bunch more values, so maybe you had like grade, maybe you had other stuff like that, or like a last name, you could check to make sure those are all the same, or you can just kind of customly do it the way that you want to say two different objects are the same, right? Okay, so the next thing I want to be able to do is compare things using like greater than sign or less than sign, right? So I want to see if like Joe is greater than Bill or Bill is greater than Tim, and we should intuitively like do that based on alphabetical order, right? So I can't really show you like a way to do it here because I don't think it's going to work if I do like Joe greater than Bill. Yeah, see that just is undefined. There's no way to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a method called compare to, okay? And what we have to do to compare to is we have to, we have to implement something into our class. So we're going to say implements at the top of our class, and we're going to spell implements correctly, and we're going to type comparable, and then in here we're going to do student. Now what we're actually doing here when we bring this in is we're actually implementing something called an interface. Now an interface I'm going to talk about in I think like 2 videos from now, but pretty much it's just like a set of methods that we have to use for the class to work. So when we implement this comparable thing, that means we're allowed to bring in a method that is going to allow us to compare two objects, okay? So what we'll do now is we will say public and actually what is the thing for this, the return type, public int and compare to, and then in brackets here again we're going to take student and this will be other, and we'll put our brackets here like this, okay? So now again we're going to have to return some kind of integer, and I'll show you how that works. I just got to get it up on my other screen so I don't mess this up. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to return this dot name dot compare to, and in this case we're going to compare it to another string. So the other string will be other dot name, okay? So essentially what this is going to do is it is going to compare this name to this other name, and it's going to give us an integer value saying kind of how far away they are, right? So it's kind of hard to like explain, so I'm just actually going to do it from over here and you'll see what I mean. So if I go Joe dot compare to, and then again let's do Bill, let's see what we get. So we get a value of 8. Now what this means is Joe is greater than Bill by a distance of 8, meaning that when we compare these first 2 letters, they are 8 away, I believe, okay? So if we wanted to check if Joe was greater than Bill, what we do is we check if this integer value returned was greater than 0. So here, greater than 0, that's going to tell us true if Joe is greater than Bill and false if he's less. So we run this and we get true. Now, let's see if we compare Joe to Tim. Okay, so T obviously is ahead of J in the alphabet, so we get a value of false. Okay, and if we get rid of this greater than 0, then we can see exactly what we're actually getting as a value. So -10, right? Because that's how far away J is from T when we're comparing them, and that's what the compare to does for us. Okay. So if we wanted to check if Joe was less than Tim, then we check if this value was less than 0. And in this case, we get true. So that's a really easy way that we can compare different objects using that compare to method, okay? So like this, so public int compare to, and you just have to remember to implement comparable student, and then you can use exactly this return statement here. Now the last thing I want to show is a string representation of an object. So I want to show you first what happens when I just want to print out my object to the screen. So I want to print Tim, and maybe ideally I'd like to see like Tim's name, right, come out to the screen. Well, look what we get here. We get tutorial1.student at, and then all these different letters. What this is printing is actually the memory location of our object. So all of our objects are actually stored in memory, in RAM, in like really fancy ways that I can't really explain to you guys. But anyways, this is like the address for it. It's like when the computer looks it up, this is what it's actually using to find Tim and find all its values. And obviously it's telling us where it is in the tutorial1 like folder file, whatever, okay? So this is no use to us. This does not help us as programmers at all. We want to see like something that's a string and gives us some valuable information. So what I need to do is I need to implement another method here that's going to change this to a string. So we've used this .toString before, but this is exactly what I'm going to use. We're going to say public string, and then we'll say toString like this, okay? And what we're going to do in here is we're just going to return a string representation of our object. So what we can do essentially is I can just return this.name, and this can be what we're going to use to represent our object. Now typically you might see people do something like this, okay, and just follow me for 1 second. They do student and they have a bracket, and then we're going to add this.name, and then they add that with another bracket here. So this way you'll see when I print it out to the screen what it looks like. Okay, we get student and then Tim, and this is just simply telling us that the object that we're printing is a type of student and the name value is Tim. Okay, and we could even get more fancy and we could add like double brackets around this.name if we want to show that this.name was a string type. Okay, now for our purpose I'm just going to get rid of this student and this bracket here, and you can see again when we print this it goes Tim. Now notice when I'm printing this I'm not actually calling this toString method. Like I'm not doing .toString. That's because Java actually knows that when we have this toString method in here, this is going to represent a string, right? So when we try to print it, it's automatically going to call that .toString method, okay? So now what we can do is we can also just call like toString. So I can, if I wanted to, I could just call .toString like this, and I could convert it to a string, and this will work the exact same way as before. You can see we get Bill, okay? Again, in here, you can change this up however you'd like. In some cases, like say your student had some grades, maybe you wanted to write their name, and then after you have like an array of all their grades or something like that, okay? So anyways, that has been it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to be talking about inner classes, then we're going to be going into interfaces and enums and some more advanced stuff that I think is pretty cool in Java. If you guys enjoyed the video, as always, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you again in another one.